I remember the exact moment I realized my future was being planned without me. And it was not a misunderstanding, it was not a guess, it was my own daughter-in-law calmly deciding what to do with my life as if I were no longer part of it. I was standing in the hallway outside the kitchen, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold in my hands, when I heard Ashley's voice, soft and measured, the same tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable, the same tone she used when she smiled at me across the dinner table and asked if I needed anything, and she said, "It will be easier once she is settled in the nursing home, then we can move forward." I did not move, I did not breathe, I just stood there listening because something in the way she said it told me this was not a conversation I was meant to hear, and yet every word felt like it had been aimed directly at me. For a long time after my husband passed, I told myself I was lucky to have family close by, lucky that my son Daniel and his wife Ashley had moved in to help out. That was the word they used, help, and I believed it because I wanted to believe it because grief has a way of making you accept comfort without questioning the cost. My house was fully paid off, a quiet 2-story home in a calm neighborhood where I had lived for over 30 years, where every room held a memory, and when Daniel suggested they move in to keep me company, to make sure I was not alone, I said yes without hesitation. Ashley had been attentive at first, bringing me tea, asking about my medications, offering to handle the bills so I would not have to worry, and I remember thinking how fortunate I was, how rare it was to have a daughter-in-law who seemed to care so much. But slowly, things began to change in ways that were easy to ignore if you were not looking closely. Ashley started answering my phone before I could reach it, saying she would screen calls so I would not be overwhelmed. She began scheduling my appointments without asking me, telling me what time I needed to be ready, what I should wear, even what I should say. At first, I told myself she was just being helpful, that this was what support looked like, but there was a quiet shift, a subtle tightening like invisible strings being pulled just a little too firmly. Then there were the documents, papers left on the dining table that disappeared when I entered the room, envelopes addressed to me that Ashley insisted on opening because she said she did not want me to get confused. I noticed how often she mentioned my age, how casually she would say things like, "It is normal to need more care at this stage." Even though I still drove my own car, still managed my daily routine, still lived my life with full awareness. That morning in the hallway, hearing her speak about a nursing home as if it were already decided, something inside me shifted completely. Not fear, not panic, but clarity. A sharp and steady understanding that I had been underestimating what was happening right in front of me. I stayed there just long enough to hear the rest, Ashley mentioning timelines, paperwork, and how Daniel would come around. And that was when I realized this was not just an idea, it was a plan already in motion. I quietly stepped back into my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my hands, steady hands that had raised a son, built a life, and carried me through every challenge I had ever faced. And I knew in that moment that I was not going to be moved, not quietly, not conveniently, not without a say. I did not confront her that day, I did not raise my voice or let her know what I had heard, because sometimes the strongest move is not to react, but to watch, to listen, and to understand exactly who you are dealing with before you decide what comes next. And as I sat there in the silence of my own home, I made a decision that would change everything. I would let Ashley believe she was in control, at least for now. I did not change anything about my routine the next day, and that was intentional, because the moment someone thinks they have control over you is the moment you gain the advantage if you stay quiet and let them continue believing it. I woke up. At the same time, made my breakfast the same way, and greeted Ashley with the same polite smile she had grown used to seeing, and she returned it without hesitation, as if nothing had changed, as if she had not already started planning the next chapter of my life without me. She asked me how I slept, and I told her I slept just fine, which was true, because clarity has a way of replacing anxiety with something much more powerful, a calm focus that sharpens every detail around you. I began to notice more than I had before, not because things were different, but because I was finally paying attention with purpose. Ashley spent more time on her phone, stepping into other rooms when she took calls, lowering her voice just enough to avoid being overheard, but not enough to escape someone who was listening carefully. Daniel, my son, seemed distant, not cold but distracted, like someone who had been told a version of the truth that made him uncomfortable but not enough to question it. I watched the way Ashley spoke to him, guiding conversations, finishing his sentences, gently steering him toward decisions that always seemed to benefit her plans. It was subtle, almost impressive, the way she built her influence one small moment at a time. I did not confront Daniel either, because I needed to understand how deep this went before I said anything that could be dismissed or twisted. Instead, I started reclaiming small pieces of control in ways that would not raise suspicion. I called my bank personally and confirmed that all my accounts were still solely in my name, and I made sure to speak clearly, confidently, leaving no room for anyone to question my awareness or capability. I scheduled an appointment with my attorney, someone I had trusted for years, and I did it quietly using my own phone on my own terms, making sure Ashley was out of the house when I made the call. I told her I was going to the grocery store that afternoon, and she offered to come with me, which she had not done in weeks, and that alone told me she was starting to monitor me more closely than before. I smiled and told her I needed the walk, that fresh air would do me good, and she hesitated for just a second before agreeing, as if she was deciding whether to insist or to let it go. That hesitation was all the confirmation I needed. At the attorney's office, I laid everything out without exaggeration. Every detail I had observed, every concern I had, and most importantly, every step I suspected was being taken behind my back. He listened carefully, asked precise questions, and then looked at me with a seriousness that matched my own understanding of the situation. He explained the legal paths Ashley might be attempting, how claims of mental decline could be used to justify control over assets, and how easily that narrative could be constructed if no one challenged it early. I felt a brief moment of anger, not loud or explosive but steady and firm, the kind that does not fade quickly, the kind that pushes you to act with intention. We began putting safeguards in place immediately, reviewing my will, updating documentation, and making it absolutely clear that I was fully capable of making my own decisions. I also arranged for independent evaluations that would confirm my mental clarity, not because I doubted myself, but because I understood the importance of evidence in a situation where perception could be manipulated. When I returned home that evening, Ashley was waiting in the living room, sitting a little straighter than usual, her expression carefully neutral, and she asked me how the grocery store was, and I told her it was crowded, that I took my time, that I enjoyed the walk, and every word I said was measured, calm, and controlled. She studied me for a moment longer than necessary, as if trying to read something beneath the surface, but I gave her nothing to work with. Inside, I was already several steps ahead, not because I wanted to outplay her, but because I refused to be quietly removed from my own life, and as I sat down in my own home in the same chair I had used for years, I understood that the game she had started was still in motion, but she no longer knew who was really in control. By the end of that week, I understood something important. Ashley was not rushing because she believed time was on her side, and that confidence made her predictable, which was exactly what I needed. I started noticing patterns that repeated with quiet consistency, the same phone calls at nearly the same hour each afternoon, the same folders she carried into the spare room that she had slowly turned into her workspace, and the same careful way she spoke whenever Daniel was nearby, always planting ideas that sounded like concern rather than control. One evening, while Daniel was in the garage, Ashley sat across from me at the kitchen table and casually brought up the topic again, saying she had been reading about options for seniors who need a little extra support, and she spoke as if she was sharing helpful information, not advancing a plan. I nodded politely, asking a few neutral questions, letting her explain in detail, and the more she talked, the more she revealed timelines, recommendations, even specific facilities she had already researched. She had done more than think about it, she had mapped it out. That conversation confirmed what I already suspected, but it also gave me something more valuable. A clear sense of how far along she believed she was, and how confident she felt in her position. The next step for me was not just preparation, it was positioning, making sure that when she made her move, every piece she relied on would no longer belong to her. I scheduled another meeting with my attorney, this time bringing all the notes I had been keeping, every detail organized and easy to follow, and we went through them carefully, building a strategy that was not reactive but proactive. We reviewed ownership of the house, ensuring that all documentation clearly reflected my sole authority, and we added additional protections that would prevent any unauthorized claims or transfers. I updated my will to remove any ambiguity, making it clear that decisions about my property and my care would remain entirely in my hands, unless I explicitly stated otherwise under conditions that could not be manipulated. We also discussed financial safeguards, setting up alerts and restrictions that would immediately notify me of any unusual activity, and I made sure that no one else had access to my accounts, not even for convenience. It was not about mistrust anymore, it was about certainty. At the same time, I arranged for a comprehensive medical evaluation with a physician who had no connection to Ashley, someone who would assess me objectively and document my mental clarity in a way that could not be questioned. I approached it calmly, answering every question with precision, demonstrating not just awareness, but control over every aspect of my life. And when the evaluation was complete, the doctor assured me that there was no indication of cognitive decline, which was exactly what I needed to reinforce my position. When I returned home that day, Ashley greeted me with a measured smile, asking how my appointment went, and I told her everything was routine, nothing unusual, and she seemed satisfied with that answer, at least on the surface. But I noticed the way her eyes lingered on me for just a moment longer, as if she was searching for something she could not quite identify. That evening, Daniel joined us for dinner, and Ashley steered the conversation once again toward future planning, speaking about stability, long-term arrangements, and how important it was to think ahead, and I listened carefully, allowing her to build her case in front of him while I remained composed. When she finally paused, waiting for a response, I simply said that I appreciated her concern and that I would consider everything carefully, and that was enough to keep her confident, enough to make her believe she was still guiding the outcome. Inside, however, everything had already shifted. The structure she thought she was building was no longer connected to anything she could control, and the more she invested in it, the more she exposed herself. I was no longer reacting to her plan, I was allowing it to unfold under conditions that I had already secured. And as I sat there listening to her outline a future she believed she was shaping, I realized that the moment she decided to act would not be the moment she gained control, it would be the moment she lost it completely. There is a particular kind of quiet that settles over a house when someone believes their plan is almost complete, and I began to feel that quiet more clearly with each passing day. Not as peace, but as anticipation, like the final moments before a decision is revealed. Ashley became more direct, though she still wrapped everything in a tone of concern, and I could tell she was preparing for something more formal, something that would move her plan from suggestion into action. One morning, she approached me with a folder in her hands, sitting down across from me at the kitchen table with a level of confidence that had not been there before, and she said she wanted to go over a few things, to make sure everything was organized for the future. I looked at the folder, then back at her, and nodded calmly, inviting her to continue. Inside were documents neatly arranged, with highlighted sections and small notes placed along the edges, and as she began to explain them, I recognized the structure immediately. These were preliminary forms, documents that could be used to establish authority over someone's decisions, presented as precaution, but designed for control. She spoke carefully, emphasizing how this was just planning ahead, how it would make things easier for everyone, how it would ensure that I was taken care of no matter what happened, and I listened without interrupting, allowing her to present everything exactly as she had prepared. When she finished, she slid the pen across the table toward me, her expression calm, expectant, almost reassuring, as if this were a simple step that required no hesitation. I picked up the pen, held it for a moment, then placed it back down gently, and said that I would like some time to review everything more carefully before making any decisions. The shift in her expression was subtle, but unmistakable, a brief flicker of tension that she quickly covered with a polite smile, telling me that of course I should take my time, that there was no rush, even though everything about her posture suggested otherwise. That moment told me exactly what I needed to know. She was ready to move forward, and she expected compliance. After she left the room, I reviewed the documents on my own, confirming every detail, every clause, every implication, and then I placed them back in the folder exactly as she had arranged them, leaving no sign that I had already seen through their purpose. That afternoon, I made another call to my attorney, updating him on the situation and providing copies of the documents Ashley had presented, and we discussed the final steps needed to ensure that when she attempted to act, she would have no legal ground to stand on. We finalized additional protections, reinforcing the structure I had already put in place, and we prepared a clear and immediate response for the moment she would try to formalize her plan. At the same time, I decided it was important to bring one more element into place, something that would not only protect me, but also reveal the truth in a way that could not be dismissed or misunderstood. I reached out to a trusted family friend, someone who had known Daniel since he was a child, someone whose presence would carry weight and credibility, and I invited him to visit later in the week under the pretense of a simple gathering. When I returned home that evening, Ashley was unusually attentive, asking if I needed anything, offering to prepare dinner, watching me with a level of focus that suggested she was waiting for something, perhaps expecting me to bring up the documents or to show signs of uncertainty. Instead, I remained exactly as I had been, calm, polite, and steady, giving her no indication that anything had changed beneath the surface. As the days moved forward, I could feel the pressure building, not on me but on her, the need to move from preparation to execution, and I knew that moment was coming soon. I had everything in place, every safeguard secured, every detail accounted for, and as I sat in my living room that evening, looking around at the home I had built over a lifetime, I understood that what Ashley saw as her opportunity was about to become her greatest miscalculation, because the plan she believed would give her control was already leading her directly into a situation she could not reverse. The moment Ashley chose to act did not arrive with urgency or confrontation. It came quietly, wrapped in the same calm tone she had used from the beginning, but there was something different underneath it, something more final. It was a Saturday morning when she approached me again, this time with Daniel beside her, and I could see immediately that she had decided it was time to move forward. Daniel looked uneasy, his shoulders slightly tense, his eyes shifting between Ashley and me as if he was unsure where to settle, and that alone told me he had been convinced, but not entirely comfortable with what was happening. Ashley placed the same folder on the table, though now it was thicker, more complete, and she spoke with a clarity that suggested she had rehearsed every word. She explained that they had been thinking about what was best for me, that they wanted to ensure I was safe, that this was about long-term stability, and she mentioned a specific facility, describing it in detail, emphasizing how well it was reviewed, how it would provide peace of mind for everyone. I listened without interrupting, allowing her to present everything fully, and when she finished, she turned the folder toward me again, this time not just with expectation, but with a quiet sense of inevitability. Daniel added a few words, his voice softer, saying that they just wanted what was best, that it would make things easier, and I could hear the uncertainty in his tone, the hesitation he had not completely hidden. I looked at both of them for a moment, then reached for the folder, opening it slowly, flipping through the pages as if I were seeing them for the first time, even though I already knew every detail inside. Then I closed it gently, placed my hands on the table, and spoke in a calm, steady voice that did not rise or waver. I said that I appreciated their concern, that I understood what they were trying to do, but that I would not be signing anything, not now, not later, not under any circumstances that were being presented to me. The silence that followed was immediate and heavy, not loud, not dramatic but unmistakable. Ashley's expression tightened, her composure slipping just enough to reveal the frustration beneath, and she leaned forward slightly, asking if I understood what I was refusing, reminding me of the benefits, the convenience, the support it would provide. I nodded, maintaining eye contact, and said that I understood completely, which was why I had already taken the necessary steps to ensure that no one could make those decisions on my behalf. That was the moment everything shifted. Daniel looked at me, confusion replacing uncertainty, and Ashley's posture changed, her confidence faltering as she tried to process what I had just said. I continued, calmly explaining that I had met with my attorney, that my financial accounts were secured, that my property ownership was clearly documented, and that I had undergone an independent medical evaluation confirming my full mental capacity. I told them that any attempt to claim otherwise would be directly challenged with evidence, and that all necessary protections were already in place. Ashley tried to respond, her voice still controlled but no longer steady, asking why I would take such steps without discussing it with them, and I answered simply that I had heard enough to understand what was being planned, and that I had chosen to act accordingly. Daniel turned toward her then, his expression shifting again, this time toward realization, and for the first time, I saw him truly questioning what he had been told. Ashley attempted to regain control of the conversation, saying there must have been a misunderstanding, that everything she had done was out of care, but the structure of her plan had already been exposed, and there was no way to reshape it into something else. I remained calm, not raising my voice, not escalating the moment, because I did not need to. The truth was already present, clear and undeniable. As the silence settled once more, I understood that this was not the end, but it was the turning point, the moment where control shifted completely, and as I looked at Ashley, no longer certain, no longer composed in the way she had been before, I knew that everything she had been building had just lost its foundation, and there was nothing she could do to put it back together. The room did not return to normal after that conversation, even though nothing outwardly dramatic happened, because once the truth is spoken, it does not disappear. It settles into every corner and changes the way people look at each other. Daniel stayed quiet for a long moment after I finished speaking, his eyes moving between me and Ashley, as if he was trying to reconcile two different versions of reality that no longer aligned. Ashley was the first to speak again, her tone softer now, almost careful, as if she was attempting to rebuild something that had just been fractured. She said there had been a misunderstanding, that everything she had done was meant to help, that she never intended to take control without my consent, and she emphasized the word consent in a way that sounded practiced, as if she was adjusting her narrative in real time. I listened without interrupting, not because I believed her explanation, but because I wanted Daniel to hear it fully, to process it without interference. When she finished, Daniel finally spoke, his voice slower, less certain than before, asking her directly why the documents had already been prepared if nothing had been decided, and that question hung in the air longer than anything else had. Ashley hesitated just for a second, but it was enough, and she responded by saying she was simply being proactive, that she wanted to be ready in case something happened, that it was responsible planning, but the confidence she once had was no longer there. I could see Daniel noticing it too, the small inconsistencies, the way her explanations did not fully match what he had just heard from me. I did not push the moment, I did not add more than what was necessary, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is allow someone to arrive at the truth on their own. Instead, I spoke calmly, saying that I understood the importance of planning, but that planning should never remove someone's autonomy, and that everything in those documents had already crossed that line. I reminded them that I was fully capable of making my own decisions, that I had taken steps to ensure those decisions would be respected, and that any future discussions about my life would need to include me as the primary voice, not as an afterthought. The conversation ended without resolution, but it did not need one because the shift had already occurred. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the house changed in subtle but significant ways. Ashley became quieter, more reserved, no longer moving with the same certainty she had before, and I noticed she spent more time alone, likely reassessing what had gone wrong. Daniel, on the other hand, began to engage with me differently, asking more questions, checking in without Ashley prompting him, as if he was trying to rebuild a connection that had been influenced by someone else's perspective. One evening, he sat down across from me, just the two of us, and asked if I had really heard everything Ashley had said that day in the hallway, and I told him the truth, that I had heard enough to understand the intention behind it, and that I chose to act before it went any further. He nodded slowly, taking that in, and I could see the weight of it settling with him, not as guilt but as realization. I did not blame him, not directly, because influence can be quiet and persistent, and he had trusted someone he believed was acting in good faith, but I also made it clear that trust does not remove responsibility, and that moving forward, he needed to see things for himself rather than through someone else's interpretation. Meanwhile, Ashley attempted to regain some control in smaller ways, offering help again, asking if I needed assistance with things she had previously taken over, but there was a difference now, a hesitation, a lack of certainty that had not been there before. I accepted some of her offers politely, declined others, and maintained clear boundaries in every interaction, making it evident without confrontation that the structure she had tried to build no longer existed. Inside, I felt something settle into place, not relief exactly, but a steady sense of control that came from knowing I had protected what mattered before it could be taken from me. The situation was not completely resolved, not yet, but the direction had changed, and as I watched the dynamics in my own home adjust around the truth that had been revealed, I understood that the next step would not come from reacting to Ashley's actions. It would come from defining the terms of what was acceptable moving forward, and ensuring that those terms could not be quietly rewritten again. It became clear to me that the situation had reached a point where quiet observation was no longer enough, because even though the balance of control had shifted, the structure of the household still carried the weight of what had been attempted, and leaving it unresolved would only allow space for the same pattern to return in a different form. I decided that the next step needed to be deliberate and visible, not aggressive but undeniable, something that would define the boundaries of my life in a way that could not be questioned again. That was why I moved forward with the gathering I had quietly arranged earlier in the week. I invited Daniel, Ashley, and our longtime family friend Robert Hayes, someone who had known our family for decades, someone whose presence carried both familiarity and authority, Not in a legal sense but in a personal one that mattered just as much. When Robert arrived that evening, the atmosphere in the house shifted immediately, not tense but more formal, as if everyone understood that this was not just a casual visit, even though no one said it out loud. We sat in the living room, the same place where so many ordinary conversations had taken place over the years, but this time the purpose was different. I began calmly, thanking Robert for coming, then turning to Daniel and Ashley, explaining that I wanted to have an open conversation about the future, not as something decided for me, but as something I would define clearly myself. Ashley sat quietly, her posture composed but reserved, while Daniel listened with focused attention, no longer looking to her for cues. I explained everything step by step, not emotionally but factually, outlining what I had heard, what had been presented to me, and what actions I had taken in response. I spoke about the legal protections I had put in place, the independent evaluation confirming my capacity, and the clear documentation ensuring that all decisions regarding my life and my home would remain under my control. Robert listened carefully, occasionally nodding, his presence reinforcing the seriousness of what was being said without needing to intervene. When I finished, I paused, allowing the silence to settle, then I stated clearly that moving forward, there would be no assumptions made about my care, no decisions discussed without me present, and no actions taken on my behalf without my explicit agreement. Ashley finally spoke, her tone controlled but noticeably softer than before, saying she understood and that she had only been trying to help, but this time her words carried less weight, not because they were louder or weaker, but because the structure around them had already been established. Daniel spoke next, more firmly than he had before, saying that he agreed with me, that everything moving forward needed to be transparent and respectful, and that no one should feel like decisions were being made behind their back. That was the moment I saw the final shift, not dramatic but complete, the alignment of understanding that had been missing before. I then addressed the practical side of things, explaining that the house would remain solely under my ownership and control, and that while Daniel was always welcome as my son, the living arrangement would need to be reconsidered if boundaries could not be fully respected. I did not say it as a threat, but as a condition, a clear line that defined what was acceptable and what was not. Ashley lowered her gaze slightly, and for the first time, there was no attempt to redirect or reshape the conversation, only a quiet acknowledgement that the situation had moved beyond her control. The evening ended without raised voices or conflict, but with something far more significant, clarity that could not be undone. After Robert left, the house felt different again, not tense, not uncertain, but settled in a way it had not been for weeks. I sat alone for a while, reflecting on everything that had happened, not with anger, but with a steady sense of resolution, because what mattered was not just that I had stopped something from happening, it was that I had redefined the terms of my own life in a way that could not be quietly changed again. And as I looked around my home, I knew that whatever came next would happen on my terms, not anyone else's. In the days that followed, the house settled into a rhythm that felt more honest than anything we had experienced in weeks, not because everything was perfect, but because nothing was hidden anymore. And that alone changed everything. Ashley no longer moved through the space with quiet authority, adjusting things without asking or making decisions on my behalf. Instead, she became more measured, more aware of the boundaries that had been clearly defined, and while her politeness remained, it was no longer a tool, it was a necessity. Daniel made a visible effort to reconnect with me, not in a dramatic way, but in small, consistent actions that carried more weight than words, asking me about my plans, listening without interruption, and making sure that conversations about the future included me fully rather than circling around me. I could see that he was processing everything, not just what had happened but how it had been allowed to happen, and that kind of reflection takes time, but it was real, and that mattered more than anything immediate. One evening he sat with me again, this time without hesitation, and told me that he should have paid closer attention, that he should have asked more questions instead of assuming everything was being handled correctly. And I listened, not to assign blame but to acknowledge that awareness had finally taken its place where assumption once lived. I told him that trust is not about never making mistakes, it is about recognizing them clearly and choosing differently moving forward, and he nodded in a way that showed he understood, not just the words but the meaning behind them. Ashley, on the other hand, kept her distance at first, not out of defiance, but out of uncertainty, as if she was trying to understand where she fit within the new structure that had been established. Over time she began to engage again, but differently, asking before acting, offering help without insisting, and most importantly, accepting when I declined, which was something she had not done before. It was not an immediate transformation, but it was a necessary adjustment, and whether it came from reflection or from the realization that her previous approach would no longer work, it did not matter, because the outcome was the same, the boundaries were being respected. A week later I made another decision, one that was not driven by reaction, but by clarity, and I sat both of them down to explain it. I told them that while I appreciated the effort to move forward, I believed it would be best for them to find their own place, not as a punishment, but as a way to restore balance for everyone involved. I explained that this house was my home, built over decades, and that I needed to live in it without feeling like I had to monitor or defend my place within it. Daniel listened quietly, then nodded, understanding the reasoning without argument, and Ashley, though visibly surprised, did not resist, perhaps because she understood that this decision was final, not emotional, but grounded in everything that had already been established. Over the next few weeks they made arrangements to move out, and the process was calm, respectful, and free of conflict, which was something I had not expected at the beginning of all this. On the day they left, Daniel hugged me, holding on just a little longer than usual, and told me he would visit often, and I told him he was always welcome because he was my son and that would never change. Ashley thanked me quietly, her voice steady, and while there was no need for a deeper conversation, there was a clear understanding between us that did not need to be spoken again. After they were gone, the house felt different, not empty but restored, like a space that had returned to its original purpose. A place where I could live on my own terms without interference or uncertainty. I walked through each room slowly, not out of nostalgia, but out of appreciation, recognizing that what I had protected was not just property or control, but something far more important: my independence, my voice, and my right to define my own life. And as I sat down in the same chair where I had first realized what was happening, I understood that the strongest decisions are not always the loudest ones. Sometimes they are the quiet, deliberate choices that ensure you are never overlooked, never underestimated, and never removed from your own story without your consent.